Well, thanks, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today for our May webinar. We call it Increasing the Ease of Use with Bullhorn Tracks. Now, as Sarah said, I'm Nancy Lobbs, and I'll take you through this content today, where we'll take a close look at how job and placement tracks work. So more specifically, we will be covering, and let's make sure you can all see my screen here, what tracks are all about. In fact, why would you want to use them? And then how can they benefit your team? We'll also be looking at how those tracks work, and then we'll jump right into adding fields into our tracks. Now, just as a heads up, when you are configuring tracks, this is only available in the corporate, enterprise, healthcare, and our talent editions of Bullhorn. Now, if any of you happen to be on the team edition and you would like to use these tracks after viewing this webinar today, all you need to do is reach out to your account manager about upgrading your Bullhorn experience. Now, just as a reminder, only Bullhorn administrators can configure job and placement tracks in your system. Now, with that out of the way, let me just explain a little bit more about job and placement tracks and how they work. But before I get into the concept of this, I always find it easier to start out with a real-life example. So let's say that as an administrator of my Bullhorn database, I've been seeing a big decline in the quality of the job and the placement data that my users have been entering in the system. And some of the users are just not filling out some of the fields. Others are entering bad data. And maybe that's because there are too many fields that they have to populate on a regular basis. And I've even heard rumblings in the office that it's a pain to enter data into Bullhorn. Obviously, this isn't a good position to be in. And some of you may have experienced this, but it's possible to recover. Now, one way to assist in this effort is to minimize the amount of fields that display when a user adds a job or a placement in Bullhorn. And that's where these tracks can come into play. So let's see how we can make your life a little bit easier. So what are job and placement tracks anyway? Well, very simply, they are a way to control what fields your users see when they're adding a job or a placement of a specific employment type. Now, for example, you can see in this slide, we're adding a direct hire job. Now, do your users really need to see the scheduled end or the pay rate fields when they're adding a direct hire job? Probably not. Besides that, your company may also want other fields or even custom fields to only show for specific employment types. So hopefully you're beginning to see the benefit of using tracks. And the more unnecessary fields that we can get rid of when we're adding records, all the better. So how do you add job and placement tracks? In other words, how do they work? Well, as an administrator, let's just talk about this here. You've probably noticed that when you're in field maps, you have job 1 through 5, as well as placement 1 through 5 in that field mappings tool. Now, here's a spoiler alert. This is where the tracks are set up. Now, in this webinar, just for the sake of time, I'm only going to be working with the job tracks. Now, you might notice on this slide that I've put a star next to the job. The job is considered the master track. And this will make sense as we dive deeper, into how they work. So my next step is I'm going to open up Bullhorn so that we can all take a look. So give me a moment here while I switch screens. And we can take a look at how this is done. So I am already logged into Bullhorn, as you can see here. And just so that you're all aware, this Bullhorn database that I'm working out of today does not have the tracks enabled at all. So just to show you an example, when I go to add in a job order, I can come up here to our fast find, or excuse me, my fast add field, and select the job entity. And then of course the next step is to always select the employment type of the job that you would like to add. So let's stick with contract this morning. And as I scroll through this page and we look at all these different fields, you're going to be able to see every unhidden field regardless of the relevance for this particular employment type. So for example, we know this is a contract position, right? And if we take a look here, we still have a salary field, right? And if I scroll down even a little bit further on this page, there's also a field here for benefits. Now, both of those fields, even though they're visible, they may not be necessary for a contract job. And this is what I'm looking to tidy up. So what I'm going to do next is go into field maps and do just that. So let me navigate back here to my main menu. And what we're going to do next is click on our admin folder to access our tools and then select field mappings. Now, once this page loads up, we'll be able to see all of our entities on the left-hand side here. And as I scroll down, I'm going to stop right here at the first job track, which, as you remember, is our master track. So by expanding this, you're going to be able to see every single field that my users would see when they're adding a job, regardless of the employment type. So as you can see, fields like status and priority and owner and so forth. And the page just goes on. Now, as I mentioned, the first job track is really the most important one. This job track must include every field that you use in subsequent job tracks in order for them to appear. Now, this is going to make a lot more sense in just a moment. So let me scroll back up here to the top of the master job track here and expand my employment type field. Now, as you can see over here in the value list, we have contract, contract to hire, and the direct hire employment types all listed here. And all of these values must stay in that very first job track. I don't want to remove any of those, but what I need to do next is set up our second job track. So to do that, I'm just going to collapse the master track here and go into job track 2. Now, once here, I can also expand the employment type field and notice my value list. All right, right now there are no values in that field. And if you remember our value list from the first job track, what we need to do is take the first value, which is contract, and just add it as a value here. So let me just type that in, just like that. Now, this is what's telling my database to only show me the fields in this job track that pertain to contract jobs. Now, both contract and contract to hire jobs are very similar. So I'm also going to add the second value that was in my first job track, and that was the one for contract to hire. Now, it's really important when you're adding multiple values in this list, just make sure that you separate each one with a comma, no space, and I'll type in my value just like that. Now, my users are going to be able to see the very same set of fields regardless of what they choose out of these two employment types. Now, let's also configure the fields by hiding a few that we don't need to see when we're adding either a contract or a contract to hire job. So let me first just collapse the employment type field there and then search for one of the fields that I would like to hide. For example, on a contract job, I don't really need that salary field. So I'm going to search for it here And once I find it, I simply have to check this hidden checkbox here to hide that field. Now, one important thing to note is that if you hide a field that's marked required, which would be indicated by this checkbox right here, it's important to remove that value, that check mark. Otherwise, you would see an error message when you're adding that job. And that's because you cannot populate a required field if it's hidden. So just make sure that you double check that required checkbox before you hide any field. Now, there are a couple of other fields that I would like to hide for contract jobs. So let me clear that filter and next search for the pay unit field. And again, I'm just going to check the box here. So we've hidden that field. It's not required. So I can clear that filter. And then I have one last field that I would like to hide from this particular job type, which would be benefits, because it's not normally applicable. So once I find that field, I can again just check the hidden checkbox to hide the field. Now I'm just going to clear those filters, collapse my job track 2, and now let's focus on job track 3. So when I expand that, at this point, I'm really going to be going through the same process, but now this would be for my direct hire employment type. And I need to start by adding that direct hire value to the employment type value list. So I'll start by expanding the employment type field. And then in the value list, I'm going to just enter in direct hire. Now again, I'm going to want to hide the fields that aren't relevant to direct hire jobs. So let's go ahead and collapse employment type. And first, I'm going to search for the scheduled end date field. Once I find that field, I'm going to double check the required box. And as you can see, this particular field is required. So I first have to remove that check mark so that it's no longer required, and then hide it by just checking this checkbox right here for the hidden value. Now I'm going to clear that filter. And there are a couple of additional fields that I would like to hide as well. The next one would be for the pay rate. So there's my pay rate field. I'm going to check the box to hide it. And then I would also like to hide the bill rate field. So I'm just going to type that value, locate the field, and again, hide that one. So I can clear those filters now. And really that's it. Since I only have 3 employment types, I'm going to leave the job track 4 and 5 alone. And of course, they're found down below, but I don't really need to focus on this one or this one at this point. And these are the, of course, would only be used if you needed additional tracks for more employment types. Now, as long as you don't populate the employment types value list for those tracks that you're not using, then Bullhorn won't look at them. Now, it's very important, though, that I save all of those changes that I just made. So I need to just scroll up to the top of this page here, click my Save button, and just give it a moment to confirm that those changes have been applied. And, since I made system-wide changes, I will need to refresh my login. Now, to do this, I'm going to log out of Bullhorn and then log back in. So please bear with me. This usually takes a minute or two to update. So we definitely want to allow enough time so that when we do log back in, we should see those changes take effect. So first step would be to come up here to my username, log out of Bullhorn. And then I'm even going to close this browser altogether and open up a fresh one to log back in. So I'm just going to navigate to my website here. And then, of course, once I'm there, I should be able to enter in my username and password. But let's make sure we have the correct website here. There we go. So on this page, I'll just enter in my Bullhorn username. And of course, my password. And again, I'm just going to pause for just a moment or two. I want to allow enough time to ensure that those changes will take effect, and then we'll be able to see our updates. And I'm hoping that I have allowed enough time, but we'll check it out. And I always say no worries, because if not, I can always log back in again. So we'll go ahead, open up Bullhorn. And this is where it really gets good, because now when I go to add a job and select a specific employment type, I should only see the fields that are related to that employment type. So going back up to my fast add, I'm going to select the job entity, and then I'm going to select the contract option. Now, I should not see the fields that I hid for the contract jobs. So as I scroll down the page, you'll notice I have my pay rate field and I have my bill rate field, but I no longer have a salary field on this page. And if I go down a little bit further under skills and experience, this is where that benefits field was displayed earlier. So you can see that has now been hidden from view. Now, if I were to go back and select a direct hire job to add, I wouldn't be able to see the fields that I hid for that track. Pretty cool, right? So now we're on track for cleaning up our database and preventing that bad data. And like I said, tracks work the same for placements. So I can configure those to hide the irrelevant fields as well. Now, the one thing to keep in mind, though, is that if you do use placement tracks, you should mirror the employment types used for your job tracks. So, for example, if your second job track is for contract type positions, then your second placement track should also be for contract. Now, let me go ahead and close out of this Add Job screen, because the last topic that I would like to cover with everybody today is getting a field to populate in all job tracks. So to do that, I have to go back to my admin tools. Let me access that folder and select field mappings once again. And I'm again going to expand my master job track. And in this example, let's say that I would like to display the number of openings field for all of my jobs, regardless of its type. Now for this, I have to search for that field and then make it visible in the application. So to search for that field, I'm going to just simply type in a few initials of the field, like NUM, for the number of openings field. And you can see that this field is currently hidden from view. So all I have to do is uncheck that box to make it visible. Now, if you remember in the beginning of this demo, how I said the first job track needs to include every field that you use in subsequent job tracks. And while this is true, remember that just because a field is unhidden here does not mean it's unhidden for any other job tracks. I also need to go into each track separately that I want that field to appear in this case, job tracks 2 and 3, and then configure the field there. All right, so I'm going to collapse my master job track, go into job track 2 next, and search for that number of opening fields. Uncheck the hidden checkbox here. And then do the very same thing for job track 3. Uncheck the hidden checkbox once again. And then if I only wanted the field to appear when adding a job with a certain employment type, I would just leave it hidden in the necessary tracks. And just as a side note, that, this is also the case if you're using any custom fields on your job record. So if you create a custom job field and you would like it to display, you would need to create it in that first job track and then every subsequent track that you want it to appear in. So if you just remember to follow that process, you'll be okay. And with that done, I'm just going to save my changes one last time. Make sure those changes have been applied here. And then, again, I'm going to log out just to refresh everything and check out those changes in action here. I'm going to, again, close out of my browser tab and go to a new browser and start logging back in. And once again, entering in that username and password. And hopefully I've allowed enough time to be able to see that change take effect. Remember, we're going to be looking for that additional number of openings field on our job records. So let's go ahead and log into Bullhorn. And then I'll try adding another job. So going up to Fast Add, selecting our job entity. And this time, let's try the direct hire position. And as I scroll down the page, let's see, I was hoping the number of openings field would appear right about here. I'm not seeing it. So again, this is a perfect example of what can happen when you're making admin changes. So I may have not allowed enough time for that field to show up in the application. So let's close out and just try it one more time. So I'm just going to do a quick log out again. And we'll give it another moment. And we'll log back in here quickly. And try this once again. And just for the heck of it, when I'm adding a job this time, let's select the contract employment type instead. Well, look at that. I am still not seeing that number of openings field. Now, I have to say, if it doesn't show up the second time around, one other thing that I would probably just double check is that I made my changes appropriately. And so this is a good exercise to go through. I would just come back here to admin and go back into field mappings and just double check those 3 tracks. So remember, we would have to first make it visible in the master job track, right? So we were looking for the number of openings field. And we can see it's definitely not hidden there. And let's just double check job track 2 at this point. Also unhidden here. And one last one to review here. And of course, we can see that it is not hidden here as well. So that being said, let's just try one other thing here. Yeah, I might log out one last time. I don't want to take up too much time because I do want to be sensitive to everybody's schedules here, but I think I have time to do this and still take a few questions, hopefully, here at the end. All right. So we'll test this out. So we'll choose to add a job, select job, and I guess it doesn't really matter which one I pick here, but we haven't selected contract to hire in the past, so let's check out that one. And my goodness, I'm still not seeing that. So at this point, if I were a client, I would probably get in touch with support because definitely I know I made those changes correctly. But again, I think sometimes it really has to do with the number of records that need to be updated in Bullhorn. But it is a simple process really of just either hiding or unhiding a field. Okay, so with that being said, I just want to remind everyone that, you know, in addition to what I've just shown you, if you do create a custom field in your application, and if you would like it to appear when you add a job of any employment type, make sure that you create it first in that master track, and then every other track where you would like it to appear. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go back to my slideshow here. And I wanted to just wrap up and talk just for a moment about the things that we covered today related to job tracks and really how they can make working in Bullhorn more efficient. So we defined what tracks are. We explained a use case for tracks. And then we also looked at how to display fields in the tracks themselves. And while all of this can help make your life and your user's life easier, you know, you'll still need to be cognizant when you are configuring fields in Bullhorn. You know, some of the tips that I've learned from our customers over time include don't make too many fields required because, you know, that can be frustrating to your users. Also, use those field hints and descriptions and just ensure that your team knows how you want them to enter that data. So I hope that you found the content of this webinar helpful, but you know, for more information, you can check out our customer community. We have an article about setting up tracks. And if you're more of a hands-on person, check out setting up opportunity, job, and even placement tracks. We have an e-learning video in our Bullhorn Learning Hub about that. You'll actually find it within the admin training course. So Sarah, let me turn it back over to you to check for any quick questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. So we actually only have about 1 minute left here, so I'm just going to do one question. Nancy, when I go to my field maps, I don't see placements 2 through 5. Do I need to do something on my end to enable placement tracks?
Well, you know, that's a great question, Sarah. And let me just take you back into Bullhorn here and into field mappings. You're going to notice in my application that when I scroll down this list of entities, I can see all of my placement tracks here. Here's the master one and then the subsequent ones. But placement tracks are actually enabled by our Bullhorn support team. So please have either your account or your support contact reach out to the support team so that they can enable those in your database if you'd like to use them.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. So that's it for today's webinar. We're right up against 30 minutes, so I'm going to go ahead and cut it off. But as a reminder, we will be sharing the webinar recording with all attendees within the next 24 hours. And for the questions that we did not have time to get to, we'll follow up via email with the answers to those. So for additional training resources, like Nancy said, don't forget to log into the Learning Hub through the customer community at help.bullhorn.com. Thanks, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.